It begins with a hand, actually with two hands. In the Book of Leviticus, a person leans both hands onto the head of a sacrifice. In the Book of Numbers, Moses leans his hands onto Joshua. Somewhere between those two gestures, one ritual and one political, one may be personal and the other societal, Judaism invents one of the most enduring ideas. Authority can be transmitted. Moses to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, a chain. But then something extraordinary happens. The chain breaks, the Sanhedrin disappears, the original system of rabbinic ordination, Semikhah, the laying on of hands, collapses almost 1,600 years ago. And yet, Judaism keeps going, which raises a question that sounds simple but turns out to be explosive. Who speaks for the Torah when the chain of authority is broken? Because if the original chain broke, the real question is, who gave the rabbis their power? Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform, and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week we read Parshat Vayikra. Join us as we trace the strange history of rabbinic authority from sacrifices and Semikhah to Sanhedrin, Napoleon, and the modern idea of Das Torah. Rabbi, I hope we have time for it all. We shall see.
What a week this is going to be.
So I've always been really struck by Semikhah and the dual way it's used. We're going to start in Leviticus 1 and we just opened up a new book, everybody, Vayikra, where 4 verses in, it talks about a Semikhah in regard to the sacrifices, and then we're going to start exploring as we always do. So in Leviticus 1:4, it says, he is to lean his hand onto the head of the offering, up that there may be acceptance on his behalf to effect ransom. Now, Everett Fox already says that lean his hand, the meaning of this act has puzzled commentators. It might symbolize ownership, a statement of the reason for the sacrifice, or perhaps identification with the animal as a substitute for the life of the worshiper. And that, Rabbi, kind of links to the next problem that he has, which is this question of what lekaper alav is, which he translates on to effect ransom. To effect ransom, Hebrew kapar, the aspect of ransoming mentioned here does not recur with the other sacrifices. Some have postulated an original non-priestly venue for this type of offering, but it certainly does remind us of the scapegoat, of the Sir Azazel, where literally the sins of the Jewish people are transferred onto the goat. So we have both this Semikhah, which is putting the hands on the animal that's going to be sacrificed, and we have this sense of somehow some sort of kapara or ransoming, all in one verse.
That is, the whole thing is interesting. The relationship between kapara, meaning atonement, like Yom Kippur, and ransoming is also interesting. Somehow ransoming is a form of atonement. But okay, let's go. Let's leave it to Semikhah for today.
But we do have the kaparot with the chickens on top.
Right,
You're
correct.
basically transferring, by touching an animal, your guilt. And that's why I said both personal and societal. The Cheskuni says something very similar to what Fox just said. He says, "V'samach yodo," and you will rest your hands. According to the plain meaning of the text, this is not a commandment, but the Torah describes the norm when people offer such an animal. It describes a preparatory activity. So it's almost, though, Rabbi, and I'm going to argue this, it's almost natural. This is not necessarily Jewish or one of our innovations or introductions. It's natural. And I love when we integrate the movements of the body or the position of hands into our prayer, gestures. This is clearly a gesture that the Chizkuni is arguing is almost natural and universal.
That is I think it's right, but it is interesting that, the Chizkuni says that that's why we do it. We do it because that's what everybody does. That's how they prepare themselves for an important action.
He says, Kach minhag b'nei adam. It seems to be the minhag, the tradition of
Now,
humankind.
it's not only placing your hands on something, but probably shaking hands is related to that.
I never thought of that. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so we're introducing more ingredients to the mix. Now, I am now showing, if you're watching this on video on YouTube, I am showing a picture of my grandmother blessing my father. And this is literally how she blessed us. She took both of our hands, she put them on our head. In her case, she held her mouth very close to us. She would whisper the blessing and end with a kiss. You could feel the transference. Is this a traditional way of blessing one's children, Rabbi, putting the hands on the head, or was it just my grandmother?
No, that's traditional. She seems very dramatic about it, but yeah, it's very traditional. Where was she from?
She was from the Lower East Side. She was
Oh,
born in the Lower East Side. Her father was a Chazan from Austria-Hungary, but I assume this was traditional. She did not make this up. This is the way she was blessed.
that's what she got from her father or from her mother or from her grandmother, for sure.
I think so. So this universality is of this notion of this movement is fascinating. And our good friend Shlomo Freud, otherwise known as Sigmund, actually focused very much on transference. And he, in regards to psychoanalysis, it's a technical term, but it represents a crucial concept in psychoanalysis, referring to the displacement of feelings, fantasies, and desires from past relationships onto the therapist. In modern listings of this in the academia, it says empirical research has shown that transference phenomenon occur in all close relationships, including therapeutic settings, are influenced by factors like the patient's attachment style. While the relationship between transference and therapy outcomes remain ambiguous, insights gained from transference work, particularly through its interpretation, are seen as beneficial. So again, what I'm saying is this concept of transferring, whether it's onto an animal, whether it's onto one's child, it seems to be very natural and very potent, and analyzing it as we are going to do today will give us insights, I think. But I just love that this is such a minhag b'nei adam that we're going to be looking at today.
And that's interesting. And transference, I mean, that's taking it to the next level. That's what you saw when your grandmother blessed your father. You saw transference. Chizkuni's not talking about that. That's your interpretation of what the experience is, what the ritual is.
Yeah, I don't know what happens in Orthodox shuls. I know in my conservative synagogue, at a bar mitzvah, at a certain point in time, the rabbi will take his hands.
Correct, and give him the priestly blessing.
Priestly blessing. He doesn't do the thing that Dr. Spock with his hands, but he gives him the priestly blessing by having his hands over. Is there a Masorah? Is there a minhag for that?
I think that's the same tradition. That's your grandmother's tradition, but just it's transferred to the rabbi, for sure.
Okay, let's move on. Now we're doing Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, and since we are starting the book of Leviticus, you all should know that this was David Tzvi Hoffman's book. He picked Leviticus. There are many rabbis that cringe at the thought of Leviticus giving sermons, explaining anything. It's all about sacrifices, but David Tzvi Hoffman actually took it upon himself to explain it. This is what he writes with our pasuk in mind. He says the word his hand yado must be understood as referring to both hands. This is especially clear in light of the explicit verse later in Book of Leviticus, which cites, "And Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the goat." That, if you recall, is the scapegoat on Yom Kippur. Accordingly, our sages established the rule in Menachot. This serves as a general principle. Wherever the Torah says his hand, it means two hands. Further proof goes on upon David Tzvi Hoffman that the laying on of hands was performed with both hands can be seen in the following verse in Leviticus 8:14, 18, and 22. They lay their hands. So when it actually came to carrying out the rules, or actually, I would say, describing what we are prescribed here, it's with two hands. And then he says, similarly, in the book of Numbers 27:18, God tells Moses, and you shall lay your hand upon him, Joshua. So I found it fascinating that there was the beginning of a segue between the smicha of putting your hands, maybe your sins, maybe your problems onto the animal that was going to be sacrificed, and transferring leadership as happened with Joshua. David Tzvi Hoffman does not see a disconnect. When it comes to smicha, it is the same smicha that you do on sacrificial animals as you do in the penultimate transfer of leadership when Moses transferred the leadership onto Joshua. It says, lay your hand upon him.
Right. Now, it's interesting. He proves that the singular hand means hands in the plural, because in that story of Moses and Joshua, God says, place your hand. And what he does is he places his hands. And obviously, he's listening to God. So it must be that hand and hands are the same thing. So not only does he connect them, but he proves from there what it really means.
And in the process, he connects them. So he's helping me segue into leadership.
Correct.
Now we go into the Talmud in Chagiga. And the Talmud, the Gemara raises an objection, and it says, speak to the children of Bnei Israel. That comes from verse 1:2. We started with Leviticus 1:4, but in 1:2 says, this is for all the children of Israel. The word Bnei literally means sons of, and it states nearby, and he shall place his hands on the head. He quotes our verse. Here he goes, from which we learn that the sons of Israel place their hands, but the daughters of Israel do not place them. So now we're trying to say who gets the right to do smicha, and we have our heroes. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yishmael say it is optional for the daughters of Israel to place their hands. They may place their hands if they so choose, although they are not obligatory to do so. In Hebrew, it says, "Mipnei shesmicha b'nashim elu kedei la'asot nachat ruach l'nashim." So it talks about smichat b'nashim, and of course, we're taking a little bit of a tangent here, Rabbi, because I wanted to find out if any of the rabbis who are approving of smicha for women cited this verse. You'll see
and what's the answer?
No, only at Madlik will we make that connection, but they come close. But meanwhile, I love their reasoning. Kedei la'asot nachat ruach l'nashim, in order to give pleasure to the women. And they go on. Rabbi Yossi said, the sage Abba Eliezer related to me the following incident. On one occasion, we had a calf for peace offering, and we brought it to the women's courtyard, and the women placed their hands on it. We did this not because there was an obligation of placing hands in the case of women, but in order to please the women. Rabbi, you do have a Talmudic parallel to taking the Sefer Torah and bringing it into the women's section. It's just beautiful. That is not an innovation. It's right in line with the enlightened rabbinic thinking.
Fantastic. Okay, I love it.
So this is just a tangent, but I will say that luminaries like Rabbi Daniel Sperber and like Rabbi Avi Weiss do in fact bring this verse, but they don't bring it to justify smicha for nashim, but they do justify it to let women put on tefillin, let women study Torah, let women do a whole host of things, because the rabbis clearly had no objection. To the contrary, it gave them pleasure to give women this availability. That was an aside, but certainly one worth taking.
That is interesting, that women's involvement in ritual is kedei latet nachat ruach l'nashim. They make a very interesting point there. Okay, good.
And you could make the case. What happens when you do a good sacrifice? What does it give? It's a ruach. It is a sort of. There is an expression in the Bible for what it does for God, that it's pleasing to God. Is
Correct.
there not?
Correct. Well, the whole idea of bringing the incense to God is supposed to be, a sweet smell for God. There's very much that idea that we treat God the way we would want to be treated.
And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Madlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yar in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift. That's www.voice.gift and use code Madlik for 15% off. Thanks. And now back to our podcast. Now we are going to go a little bit into looking at the Mishnah on this. And the Mishnah in Menachot 92a says, for all communal offerings, there is no mitzvah of placing hands on the head of the offering, except for the bull that comes to atone for a community-wide violation of any one of the mitzvot that was perpetrated due to an erroneous ruling of the Sanhedrin, where the judges of the Sanhedrin are required to place their hands upon its head. And the second instance is the scapegoat brought on Yom Kippur. In both of those instances, we have smicha. Even though it is not personal, it is societal. Rabbi Shimon says also in the case of the goat that comes to atone for a community-wide perpetration of idol worship that occurred. So Rabbi, I see this as another segue in understanding the smicha that we see in sacrifices towards leadership. And what I mean by is saying that if the whole community sins, it is, in a sense, it has an ability to convey that sin upon the animal, but it's a special type of sin. It's when their leadership sins. It's when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake, and the Sanhedrin says it's okay to do this. It turns out it is avodah zarah, and we see that in the Torah itself. It's not as though everybody gets into a row like a receiving line and the animal that's going to be sacrificed passes by and all 600,000 men put their hands on it. No, it's their leadership who is empowered to put their hands on the animal as a shaliach, so to speak, of the people. It says in Leviticus 4:13, if it is the whole community of Israel that has erred, and the matter escapes the notice of the congregation, so that they do any of the things by God's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt, when the sin through which they incurred guilt becomes known, the congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a purgation offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. Here's the kicker: the elders of the community shall lay their hands upon the head of the bull. So, Rabbi, I am making an argument that the connection between leadership and smicha when it comes to the karbanot is even stronger, because when the community sins, the community's designated leaders are the ones who, in a sense, the designated leaders are the ones who have smicha, are the ones who put their hands upon the animal. They're kind of attached at the hip.
That's interesting. Wow. Okay. So it's the smicha is done by the zakenim, and that's what smicha is. That the transference is done by the leadership. That's really your point.
Yeah, and I what I didn't say till now is even though Freud talks about transfers in psychological terms, I think in religious, spiritual terms, I think we do have a sense of there is a power of spirit that can be transferred and it can be accepted. And I think ultimately what the texts are showing is that just as possibly bad vibes or bad spirits can be transferred onto a sacrifice that is being made to expulse the guilt, it can also be transferred from a Moses to a Joshua and from a Joshua onto the next thing in a positive vibe. There is clearly a belief in this power of being able to transfer the spiritual power from person to person, from community to community.
That is very powerful. You're right, and it's right here.
Okay, so the Ibn Ezra says the elders of the congregation, the elders are the leaders. They will lay their hands on their behalf and on behalf of all of Israel, for it is impossible for all of Israel to place their hands. So in a sense, what he's saying is what I exactly just said, that we have smicha within smicha, that they are placing their hands because they have already been made, they have been vested with the power to represent the kahal, the rest of Israel. So let's look at Numbers for a second, because now we get to the crux of leadership. Numbers 27, it says, "And God answered Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, as an inspired man, and lay your hands upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority, so that the whole Israelite community may obey. But he shall present himself to Eleazar the priest, who shall on his behalf seek the decision of the Urim before God. By such instructions shall they go out, and by such instructions shall they come in, he and all the Israelites and the whole community." Moses did as God commanded. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community. He laid his hands upon him and commissioned him as God had spoken through Moses. This is the mold, the template for leadership and transferring and authorizing leadership in our religion. Am I correct?
And of smicha. And the reason that we call the getting the rabbinic seal as getting smicha. I'll just say that if you ever went to the smicha at the Jewish Theological Seminary of the conservative movement, I think that the chancellor of the seminary actually puts his or her hands on each one of the rabbinic candidates. So they actually take it to that level. I was never there, but someone told me that. When I got smicha in YU, they didn't touch me, I promise you.
And I can say, in researching this, that is, the Talmudic says you don't have to, it's allegorical. When it comes to smicha, we'll see that there are other requirements. So first of all, we would be negligent if we didn't quote the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Here is, I think, what could be considered the introduction of the whole Mishnah. It begins in Avot, and basically what it says is Moses received the Torah at Sinai, transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly, and they said something really smart. Simon the righteous was one of the last of them in the great assembly, and he said something smart. Antigonus, a man of Socho, received the oral tradition from Shimon the righteous, and he said, it goes on Mishnah to Mishnah, and it's saying Yossi ben Yotzer, man of Zuridah, and Yossi ben Yochanan of Jerusalem received the oral tradition from them, meaning from Shimon the Tzaddik. And so every one of the initial Mishnayot in Avot is introduced by saying there was a direct line from Moses to Joshua. So this truly is the basis of Smichah and of rabbinic authority.
Fantastic. Yeah, that is the most important Mishnah in all of Mishnah, of course. And the question you asked, this isn't the time to go into it, but that's a very good question. That really should be the first Mishnah at the beginning of all of the Mishnah. It's funny that it's put at the end of a vote. That's a whole long conversation for another Madlik some other time.
Well, it's the beginning of Avot, but you're saying that Avot
it should be the beginning of Brachot. It should be the beginning of all the Mishnah. Okay, the commentaries ask that question.
It's always good when we get material for another episode. So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says the following. It says, Smichat Kenim va'arifat agala b'shlosha. The laying of hands by the sages and the breaking of the red heifer's neck in a case where a person was found are performed in front of a panel of 3 judges. So now we're getting down into the weeds a little bit, and the laying of hands of the sages, meaning to say when they give smicha, it has to be done by a bet din of 3. Is that the case nowadays, Rabbi?
No, I mean, this doesn't, the smicha of today is just symbolic. We don't need 3, but that is interesting. That is what the Mishnah says.
And of course, you get that in conversion. There you do
Correct.
Have the requirement for best
you need
of 3.
a bet din. Absolutely, yes. Correct.
Okay, but again, I just couldn't get over the fact that they can talk about both of these smichot in the same breath, which just gives me fodder to say I'm not out on a limb here. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan says it is referring to the ordination of elders, meaning to appoint sages and grant them the title of rabbi. So that is in front of 3. When did smicha go into disuse? That was during the Roman period. The Talmud in Sanhedrin 14a says, at one time, the wicked kingdom of Rome issued decrees of religious prosecution against the Jewish people with the aim of abolishing the chain of ordination. Basically, what it says is they forbade it on the capital punishment. If you gave smicha, they thought this would destroy us. But the truth is, as you say, we continued the tradition, if not the halakha. There were laws that said that smicha cannot be done outside of Eretz Yisrael, and for a while they dealt with that. In the Mishneh Torah, Maimonides actually addresses the problem. He says that at first, whoever had received smicha would convey smicha on his students. Afterward, as an expression of honor to Hillel the elder, the sages ordained that smicha would not be conveyed upon anyone unless license had been granted by the Nasi. So maybe it became a little political. But at the end of the day, what Rambam does is he suggests some solutions, and he says that basically there should only be, if there's only one judge in Eretz Yisrael, he should call 2 other judges and make them smicha. Then they should get 70 judges and give them smicha. He should create a Sanhedrin. But at the end, he says, Hadavar tzurich hachra. This issue needs resolution. Maimonides, in a sense, this was not recognized as one of the major challenges that we came up against. We survived just well and fine, but clearly there was a disruption here. And it's fascinating in Maimonides' time what happened. I will say in Napoleon's time, in terms of allowing Jews to become citizens, Napoleon wanted to come to certain conclusions about laws of interest. He wanted to have an authoritative body that could let him know what was right or wrong so that they could join the mass. And they put it together. I don't know how well that was accepted. Clearly, it was outside of Eretz Yisrael. Clearly, it was an accommodation. But even today, we don't have a Sanhedrin in Israel. What is the status? Do we need a
No, well, I mean,
Sanhedrin?
we don't have what we say, Geoffrey, is we don't have a pope. There's no central authority in Judaism. And as you and I both know, that's good and that's bad, right? On sometimes it would be good to have a central authority, but we have thrived in the fact that we have a multiplicity of opinions. Shivim panim la Torah. And Rabbi Riskin always used to talk about that there is no one set law for everybody. The law, the law is kind of a tug of war between what the rules are and what people need, and that's the role of the rabbi to try to resolve that tug of war.
But I love the fact that you said we don't have a pope. I think this is a situation where most Jews would agree that we've evolved in a good way, that we ultimately found a golden mean, or a way where rabbis are basically given authority by their followers, by people who are inspired by them. It's not doctrinaire, and it's not dogmatic. I will say that in the Haredi community, there is this sense of Das Torah, and we could have a whole episode just on that. But basically, they have gone back to a model where the rabbi knows everything, not only Torah, but they go to him for economic advice, for political advice, for social advice. And I think that the brilliance of the tradition that we follow today is that on the one hand, we honor the ability of our people. I won't say unique, but certainly something that we should be proud of, our ability to transfer our traditions, our knowledge, our wisdom, our experience, our emotions from one to another, both on a personal and a societal level. But on the other hand, we have been able to contain it to the degree that it enables us to flourish. And I think that's ultimately what we celebrate when we dive into this concept of smichah, is the ability and the magic of transference as something that we Jews have been able to master and to modify and to explore and enlarge.
Amazing. Fantastic topic. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Enjoy.
Shabbat Shalom, and see you all next week.